the screen here easily? I'm not trying. Okay.
Hello. Hi.
Hello. Hello. How are you? Yeah, that's right. I just used you.
Okay.
Now that you guys sit up here, do you have access to like the wine and beer bar?
No, I don't have the password to get in there.
They roll it out after the meeting's over. Okay. So I'm calling us to order. Is there anything I need to do beyond that? Okay. All right. So first we have the minutes from January 9th. Any concerns about those? And a reminder, if you want your microphone on, if you hit your button, that'll give me a cue to turn you on. Oh, it has, I see, okay. Wait, that's not. That's a good question.
They'll activate it when the presentation starts.
These are all on, but this one's not.
Oh, yours isn't on?
No.
Can you share?
Can you, here, are you able to see this one from?
I can see that fine.
Okay.
I can see that fine.
Roz, you look a little fuzzy, but other than that, it looks great.
Are you good with this screen, Jim?
Yes.
Okay, okay. So if there's no comments on the minutes from January 9th, I move to approve them.
I'll second that.
Okay,
Now 30.
all right. All in favor?
Aye.
We have to vote on that, right? Okay. Just making sure I'm not going through votes unnecessarily. Okay, so then our next item is public comments, project reviews. But that is a separate category in our agenda items from the actual presentation, correct? Assuming you are all here on the applicant side, I'm going to assume we have no public comments. Same for general topics, since you guys are only audience members. And with that, that moves us to project reviews. So I believe we've got at least one spot. Certainly we have enough chairs up here. There's one microphone up here, and you're welcome to come up and join us. We're recording this so that if you're up here, you'll have the microphone for the recording so that can be documented.
Do I need a pointer anywhere?
Or shall I move up here? I'm sorry, and I'm not sure. Yeah, so last time, if you could just join us up here, right, Roz?
Will I be able to maneuver?
I believe they're.
There's a clicker, a remote clicker up there.
Do you want that or just hit the arrow button? I'm fine with either way. Yeah, so there's a laptop right here? Okay.
Let's see, and I think either, yeah, all the spots have a microphone, so whichever, you're welcome to sit in any of these three. Okay.
Let me introduce Mrs. Singh is the owner of Takoma Montessori School. I'm her husband, and Ashish is the architect who's designing the school. We had meeting with HPC last month, and they have given us preliminary approval, and we're now to design everything what we're trying to do.
This is the old version of the PowerPoint. Do you want me to give you the flash drive so you can use it? Or? You need it here or you need there?
Here, up here.
Yeah, I think you should stop. Try to get that cable in there first.
It's the power cable there, just kinda gotta push it up.
Gotcha.
Takoma part. The one above folder. I'll just drag it out of the folder.
Can I just open it straight?
You can do that. Yeah. Your adjustment. Perfect. Thank you. You're welcome. Good evening, everyone. My name is Ashish Meyer. I happen to be the project architect for Takoma Park Montessori School Extension, which is located up to right behind the existing Montessori School, which is at the address 712 Carroll Avenue. This presentation will walk you through what we are doing, how we have approached the design. So just give me a few minutes and I'll walk you through the design. First slide, locate you where the current property is. This is on the bottom right corner is where the fire station is. This identifies the property is owned by Mr. and Mrs. Singh. It has two buildings where it says Montessori where the school is, and then there is a residential style building, still commercially zoned, right on the south of that building, which is the floor building. As you can see in this Google map, there are some cars parked all the way on the left of the site, which is currently being used as the main area for the existing school. We'll get into more details about that as we proceed forward. This slide shows you how the volumes are stacked up in the neighborhood. As you see, the commercial use right above the Montessori is 1 and 2 floors. The commercial use further up is 2 floors. There's a multi-family floor. Fire station itself is 2 floors. If you go south, there is a residential building, which is 2 floors. The existing building within the property we have is 2 floors as well. Existing Montessori is 1 story as we have it right now. Moving on to the next slides. As close currently to the existing school is yellow. It is a tricky polygonal building just for the nature of how the property shapes area. We try to capture it as much as possible to make that area used as much as possible. Moving on, the play area has moved now in this situation further down south, depicted in green. There's a gate required by the owner because it felt there's a certain level of security needed for kids who would be in this area and playing, so they're blown off, strangers just walking inside. So that's level 1 security coming inside the entire campus, and a wooden fence to close off. There is certain wooden fence which is already existing, which will be on the bottom and the left side of the property. The one which is proposed is in the front, which will be against Carroll Avenue, and then wrapping off with the swing gate. Now, next slide to what the street view is. As you can see in this view, this that we are talking about, which is already existing. The school, you can see in the building on the right, it calls out the Takoma 1-story, 2-story style commercial building on the left. Once introduce the new construction area, which is still existing, you can see for where it will fall as it is seen from the street. We move on. This is the view of the extension as it will fall once it is constructed and proposed. This view has been taken with the assumption that once constructed together, what will be the existing and how it will pan out and connect to with the new building back. So if I can walk you through, what you see on the right is the existing Montessori school. The door on the right is what is used right now for kids and parents to get in and out of the building. Then there's a next glass door, the glass window, which is already part of the existing. Once you go to the canopy is where the new construction starts. That new construction is basically a hallway that connects the 2-floor building to the 1-floor existing, and that will eventually become the main entrance into the school. The bollards against it have been put in there to protect from the cars which are turning back and forth into the building. The building shown for the right, which is for the left, which is a 2-floor building, has been designed keeping in mind of what has been the current architecture of the existing school. It has been embellished with some soldier cores along the bricks and the windows, which also replicate what we already have on the residential building on the left. So we've tried to mix the elements between the existing 2 buildings, so it does not look like an alien building all by itself, and it kind of morphs or like an organic development between the 2 properties. a 5-foot setback on the left with a trellis has been added to create a little landscape portion with a side entry and to soften that corner with some green areas and green planters along on the periphery. Once we get further into the next slides, here is an aerial view which gives us a better idea of what the proposal is doing. What you see in there on the right is the existing and the triangular shape extension in the back with a hallway connecting to the 2-floor building. And then a connection between the 2-story extension and the play area in the back. Here is the view once you're looking from the adjacent property from the back. The attempt has been made to not make the dreadful CMU block just stare at the parking on this end. So we have painted it to match what has been done usually by everybody else on the adjacent properties, where the paint has been used to cover up for the CMU blocks on the 0 property line.
Could you repeat that? What is that finish?
So what you're looking at is CMU, your concrete masonry units, which have been painted to match with whatever is happening with adjacent properties next to the school. Here is the aerial view looking from the play area, looking further up, showing the trellis, the landscape area between the fence and the building, and the existing school further up. Yes. Yes, sir. That is correct. What you're looking at, the 2-story building is brick, which is to match with the brick of the existing Montessori school. And what you're looking at, the hallway connector, is to match the material of the existing rear portion of the Montessori school.
Which is the existing building brick is brown.
It's, if you, yeah, let me walk you through here a slide. Yeah, you see how it's an overcast view, so it is, but it is, you're correct. It is like, it's tan in color, but it's not yellow either, and you're absolutely right on it. But our intent is to make it match to what is the existing brick, as I have called out on this slide, where you say that the note from second from top in the middle, a new brick to match existing brick from original building.
Okay, so you're not planning to paint the
Absolutely not.
other building?
No. Moving on, here is the front elevation of the building as it stacks up, architectural elevation. We are assuming the building is going, the plinth of the building is going to be about a foot above the average grade, and that's what you see is why the 10'6" is shown above, slightly above the ground line. And you have 2 floors of 10'6" each and a 2 feet of parapet above, where we intend to have our rooftop units hidden behind.
What's the height to the ground there below that's not shown?
Below the ground, we do not have anything below grade.
No, there's a dimension that's not shown.
Yes, so we do not have that dimensions about a foot in dimension. We do not have an exact survey for the grading at that point. So we are assuming it is about a foot at this point.
Okay.
But the intent is to keep it to match with the levels of whatever is coming through your existing building. Moving on, here is a side elevation of the same building. And here's the final view when you're standing at the parking, looking up at the building.
The door that's shown in this elevation?
Mm-hmm. Yes, so there is a side door
What's that used for?
so that the kids can come out of that building and connect to the play area. Plus, I would need two means of egress coming from that building itself, so 2 doors would help suffice for that. I believe, yep, that's my last slide.
My only question actually is, the fence, so you're showing the fence going all the way to the front yard.
Yes, if I may just
Yeah.
go all the way back, here you go. I think, where's one? There you go, yes.
Yeah. So when you show the elevation, it won't be an elevation. You're actually looking at a fence. So what is that fence? Is it an open fence? Is it a?
So it is a picket fence of sort. I'm looking for that picture we had of street view. Here you go. So it is already there, existing right now. The fence, if you even see the white fence on the left,
Yeah.
it's already there where you have those planks of 4-inch planks stacked along the.
But you're, I mean, unless I'm getting it wrong, it looks like you're bringing it out to the
Correct.
sidewalk, though.
Yes, yes.
How tall?
This one is 5 foot. It's going to continue to be 5 foot as it goes back in.
Why, how come you're closing in the front
Can
yard?
you remember to request just so I know to turn your microphone on? I mean, I don't need to
Yeah,
call
it's
on you.
kinda-
I just want to make sure I
Oh, yeah, okay.
Right.
catch you for the review.
So
Okay.
when talking to the owner, our concern was security of the children who will be out in the play area. And even though the areas are all connected together, it's just creating that extra layer of security to prevent kids from getting out, or parents to feel secure that once the kids are inside, they are in a secured premises.
So is that actually play area out there, or is that just the front yard that you have as a buffer?
So if you see in this slide, you can see there is a play area on the top left corner, which has a gate itself in there. Even though the gates are left closed, it is always a fear that the gap in between the bottom and the ground, if it is greater, if there is anything left in there, if a kid slips through unintentionally, so we can provide that extra layer of security for the kids to not be able to do that, or be able to prevent any accident from happening at that time.
So,
To make sure I know to turn your microphone on.
This one, that one.
The one on your microphone right there. There you go. So and then once it turns red, your microphone's on.
A question,
Yes.
a question regarding the fence that's now coming out to the street. It looks like it's a solid fence in
Yes.
this drawing. And at 5 foot high, it would likely obscure the view to the historic property.
Understood.
Have you looked at regulations in regards to that?
The owner just pointed out that the fence was actually approved in the previous version when the extension to the back of the existing property, just the triangle portion, was sent in for approval. So fence was approved at that time also. So I want to start from there and also point out that, yes, you are right. It is a mistake on my part to show it solid. It should look like the translucent fence, which is already shown along the play area. That is what they had shown as a material for approval at that point. So yes, that's a mistake on my part, that it should be that more transparent version of the fence, not the solid one.
Okay, Anne had requested.
Well, he didn't
No,
finish.
well, I'd like to keep it in order. It
Um,
worked well last time.
All right, I have two questions. So the gate that you're showing here, do people drive in to drop off the children?
Yes.
And so how does the gate work?
So this is a gate on rollers with a swing hinge on one side attached to the post. So once they're done with the day, they can close off the gate before they leave the property.
So in the morning when it's drop-off time, the gate would be open?
Correct.
I see. And then my question was, I think you mentioned you went to the Historic Preservation Commission, and did you, for a preliminary consultation, is that right?
Yes.
And did you show them the design we saw previously, or did you show them this design?
So this was after the recommendations that came from them. The recommendations that came from them included, one, reduce the height of the building somewhat as much as possible.
Okay.
Number one. Then we had a taller, deeper cornice to the building, and they asked us to tone it down so the building does not look top-heavy, and paint the back of the CMU block, which is adjacent to the property in the back of the building. I believe we can run that presentation here as well, so we can see those items. So the views are apples to apples versus what they were done before, if that is okay. Yes.
Yeah, I think we saw a previous version, and I'm comfortable just seeing the material you're proposing at this point, unless there's
Yeah,
a specific
I was
question.
just curious if they had seen this or if they had seen the previous. The previous one was an addition off the other building.
I'm talking about the presentation that was seen by HPC a month ago, where this same scope of work was shown, and based on the recommendations, directions that were provided at that time, we made these changes that you're looking at now.
Tomorrow we are meeting with them.
And as owner pointed out, we are meeting with them tomorrow again.
Oh, okay.
Yes, showing the same, what you're looking at right now.
And the fence that you're now proposing to bring up to the sidewalk, did they see that as well?
Yes.
So you have a it seemed, there was a small little fence on one of your renderings, which to me looked more like a fence that would be appropriate. So I'm just wondering whether, like there.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
that is
that
the
an
intent,
open-
yes.
It's an open
Yes.
fence? Okay.
Let me see, there is a better view of that. Here you
Yeah,
go.
If that, is that, so that's the.
That is what we intend to put in there, yes.
Okay.
So I have a few comments, questions. One, you mentioned painting the back wall. I understand the logic of when you're around the parking lot, continuing the way the retail buildings work at the back end, but it's not clear to me from the illustrations how that starts to relate to the residential property around it. And I'm concerned that a CMU wall 2 stories high is simply not reflecting the nature of the neighborhood around it. And I also, somewhat just on a design front, I'm wondering why you don't want windows on those sides. I understand, again, on the parking level,
So,
but by the time you're at the
code.
second floor, you're not,
Code does not allow me to have windows on zero line of the property.
because you're come up to the property line.
Yes.
Yeah, so then I guess that is what it is, but it's difficult to weigh in on how that, and I guess I'm also not entirely clear what of that you do and don't see from the street because of the unusual angles. So that would be helpful to see, I guess. Should you, perhaps you'll get approval and not come back, but if you do come back, it would be helpful to
So-
really have illustrations that demonstrate the street view angles of this
Right.
property.
So what we tried to do was we tried to use as much as possible to show all the possible angles, so everyone can relate to what's happening, by not hiding rather than showing what is being proposed. What I could not add in here was the existing properties which are adjacent to 7212, and how they have treated the backs of their building, which is exactly what we are proposing in here as well.
But the difference is that yours then relates to residential properties right at their property line. And if it's all out of view from the public street, then it's not in our domain. But the block is such an unusual formation. So I'll leave it at that. The other two, I know you've worked on sort of merging or balancing the retail language and the residential language. I think when you see the entrances, it's a little muddled, and I think there's an importance to the retail that's historic of a clear entrance and door. The way your existing building has the retail at the entrance, that's where the door is, and if you go down the retail in the junction, it works that way. Your back addition seems to take pieces but kind of lose the logic of them. So you have that retail window at the back of an alley, and then the door around the corner. I guess I feel like you're using the pieces, but it kind of like if you're using the pieces to reflect the historic nature, it's important to use them correctly. I don't think it's a requirement for you to have that retail window there. You could have windows that relate to the rest of your composition.
I felt when putting this design together, it was important to not just make a blank facade of just 25 feet, which is 2 floors high. To break that facade, it felt like it needed something at that corner, rather than just have 2 plain windows. Number one. And number two, the door that wraps around the corner is by nature of how I need code to have second means of egress, so that it does not open right into the parking lot, rather it opens inside the secured fences.
So I'm not concerned with the door not being facing forward, because at this point you're at the back of the lot, so you're not a retail that's right on the street.
Yes.
I don't I think the retail window reads like you've taken a chunk of the existing and applied it without the rest of the context.
That was the intention.
But I think it's without the rest of the context, so it loses. It has a kind of ahistorical quality for a historical component.
Great point. When we started this design and we were working with HPC, we were always in the conundrum which side to lean towards.
Certainly, I remember that from the earlier
or the
renderings.
Commercial. And the direction that came from HPC was very specific, to lean more towards the commercial building and use the elements from there, so it does not look alienated from either of them, even though it is connected to the commercial property.
Right, which I see how you've done that with the materials, even with the soldier course, it gives you that clear horizontal read. Obviously, HPC will decide what they feel about the individual features, but I think there's some concern with taking a feature and using it in a place like the retail does not typically have those windows at the back of the lot, and that's where you're putting it now.
Right.
But
so again,
I don't feel so strongly about it that it needs to be resolved tonight.
Right. My concern, my direction comes from. Let me put it this way. Let me see if I can get a front view here. Might be. Okay. So as you can see in the front of the street, the bay window that we have has been very judicially used by the owners as the staged area where kids find their secluded corner, where they sit behind those curtains that you see, colorful curtains, and they find this niche for themselves to play dollhouse or whatever that use they may have for that. And it became a very interesting focal point for the kids who are using that space in there. So we do have a use for that, even if it is behind it. And please mind you, even though this is a retail space, it is not being used as retail rather than a Montessori school, where spaces like these add interest and focal points for children who may be using that space. Yes, sir.
If you hit the button, I'll know to push your microphone.
Okay, I've got a number of comments, so I appreciate you bearing with me while I go through them. First of all, you made a lot of progress.
Thank you.
From what we've seen in the past, and congratulations on that. Moving the building, you've done a lot of work. One of the concerns of HTI has been the height, which you seem to have reduced almost to the 3 to 4 feet that were by the comments from the commissioner, Bill Kerwin, and endorsed by Historic Takoma. It's still not quite there. We'd like to see it come down maybe another 6 inches on each floor. Not a lot. It does not include dimension and grade, but I think the color, your comments on the color going to match the existing building will not make it as strong an element as shown in this design, which is good. The finish on the back 2 sides. I am previous owner of one of the buildings that butts up to it, 6 Grant Avenue. I would disagree with your comments. Those buildings back there have windows, they have doors, they have a lot of openings. This is going to be a blank wall. Not only is it a blank wall, but the treatments at the top of the building, the parapet, do not go around the building, because and so you're going to have, when you see the corner of the 2 different finishes, it's going to be a stark contrast. You're going to have a nice finish on one side, and then the other side is just blank.
Right.
That's going to look terrible.
Right.
So I would strongly urge you to do something about that. whether it's continuing the cornice around, which might cause some brick corbelling or setback. And I'd encourage you to use brick
Right.
around the entire building and to put some windows, at least on the upper floor, so that it does mimic the back. And it's not only the adjacent commercial building, there's an apartment complex.
Right.
So all of those people in that apartment complex who are 3 stories up, looking out onto their garden, is going to see a blank CMU wall, and they're not going to be happy with it, and it's not going to be compatible with the neighborhood at all. So I would strongly urge you to do something about that.
So if I may counter on that one. By code, if I am building on the zero property line, I cannot have any openings into the private property.
I would ask for an exception, because my understanding is Mr. Kerwin suggested that exactly to you, is the idea of putting some windows in there.
They did,
Okay,
but
so
with
I would suggest you ask for an exception.
Right.
And see where it goes.
My IBC would not allow me because that is on zero property
I
line.
understand, but IBC is enforced by the local jurisdiction. The local jurisdiction has the opportunity to provide exceptions.
Okay.
In this case, because of the nature of the buildings, of the properties you're abutting to, it would seem appropriate that an exception might be granted. I'm not saying it
Fair
would,
enough.
it might be.
Right.
So I think it's worth the effort to go through that so that you can be compatible with your neighbors. I think the worst thing that can happen here is you're going through all this exercise to make a nice facility and to be friends with your neighbors, and your neighbors are going to be very perturbed
Right.
at what they're going to be looking at.
So I do want to point out a caveat at that HPC meeting. It was pointed out if the back alley is privately owned, we do not provide the window. However, if it is publicly owned, we should provide the window. So the caveat was always about understanding if the back alley is private or public. So that was how they had directed us.
Well, and I can tell you that driveway that comes in may fit somewhat the description of public, because it is jointly owned, and it's an unusual arrangement for that driveway that comes into the property. I know that because I owned it previously.
Understood.
Okay, and this gentleman here
Good to know.
is party to it. So, okay, the other thing about height, you're not showing mechanical rooftop equipment. The mechanical rooftop equipment is likely to, if that's what you're using, is likely to be substantial.
36 inches
So
high.
I would, pardon me?
36 inches high. Condenser
That's all?
units. Yes.
It's going to sit flat on the roof?
Yes.
Or is it going to sit on, raised
No,
up?
on the flat on the roof.
It's going to sit flat on the roof?
Yes, sir.
And the absolute height is 36 inches?
Yes, sir.
That's great. Okay, that would be a big help. And I would look at, I don't think you'd see very much of it then.
No.
And I think that would be fine.
That we had the parapet high 2 foot
You had
6
it, you had it
inches
2
earlier.
foot 6, right.
And we brought it down after the recommendation. So what we did was our floor to floor was 11 feet earlier, assuming that there's going to be about 24 inches of truss. That gave us a 9 foot ceiling.
Mm-hmm.
Now we have brought it down for an 8 foot 6 ceiling inside, and floor to floor height becomes now 10 foot 6.
Okay. Let's see. We addressed the finishes, addressed the color. That's it. That's it for me. Thank you very much. And thanks again for your efforts. You've done a
Thank
great
you.
No, I agree. Looks pretty good. Actually on the window sides too, if it is a right of way and it's an alley, and someone doesn't have the right to build on it because it's a right of way, then I mean you could put windows there. I mean it's your property, but that is one option. I completely understand. I agree with you. It has to have some fire rating, I believe. But anyways, but in the back, as far as what I did like about the little window, just as a comment, was that should it not be a Montessori anymore, it could be an alley shops. So that's one, when I was looking at that, I thought, well, in the long term of things, if it turns back to being something else, what is it? And would it still fit? And I think that being, which is quaint to have in Takoma Park is an alley that leads to other shops, and you would have a shop window back there, and that would lead them in. So from that perspective, I think that that would work. And it'd be, at least have a reason to be there. So, but that's all I had. I think what you have there looks good.
Okay.
Any other comments, questions?
Can I add something?
Yes.
In regard to windows, really, I like your idea. I would really wanted if there's a exception, because the window will be a good, of course.
Yes.
If there's exception can be given by HPC and Facade, I will be happy.
Right. I believe a letter of recommendation coming from HPC that will help us. If we put that letter along with our code study analysis when it goes in for permit, the reason why we have added that window will go a long way for us to get the approval for the window.
We'd be happy to do that.
Do you know that it's and it's usually on the maps, zoning maps.
Yes.
If is it zoned strictly as someone owns that piece of property, or is it an alley?
It's not an alley, it's a
private, okay,
piece
then I
of
see.
property
I
for
see.
someone.
The driveway is half owned by entities on either side,
Yeah.
but it's dedicated to common use. It's very strange.
Yeah, so, okay, you have a problem.
Right.
All right, would anyone like to outline the letter that we'd like? Is it just an approval? Are there comments that we would like noted?
I think the only comment would be to help you get windows in the back. That's what I hear.
Would you recommend having it on all four sides? Is that what the intention is, or just on this side which is viewed from in this picture?
I personally, I mean, personally for Historic Tacoma would recommend them on both sides. But if you can only get them on one, so be it. But trying to be in harmony with the other buildings around it will, I think, make it more welcoming, your facility more welcoming to the neighborhood.
Understood.
Is probably the best way that I can put it.
You meant on the second floor level, right?
Just on the top floor.
Even if it's just on this top floor, it would be helpful. It would break up the massing.
Okay.
So is the board ready to make
Yeah.
a recommendation to HPC?
If you could say, I would say a recommendation with the pursuit of, see if it's viable to have windows placed on the back of the elevations and on the, but I think it's an approval.
I'd recommend the finish also be compatible with the brick on the other sides.
The paint.
So
No, you're actually talking about the material. You were
you
recommending
mean,
brick,
the
not just
turning, yeah,
painted CMU.
He has a point about, you have the brick and, how, you mean, you have to deal with at least a bit of a transition to return them. I'm sure your facade, just, to create that front elevation, return it some distance before you go to CMU. So I think
my concern was scaffolding, putting it on the other person's property, they put a scaffolding on. There may be easement issues to make that work between the two properties.
you just need permission. Yeah.
You would need to put a finish on the side.
I mean, we have neighbors sitting right here.
Regardless, if I still own that adjacent property, and I knew the choice between the two materials, stucco versus brick, and you wanted my permission, I'd dedicate a couple of parking spaces to
Even
you
if you-
so that you could do it. Because all it's going to do is enhance my property as well as yours. And there's nothing worse than building something that a neighbor feels diminishes the value of their property.
Yeah, and I believe a mason, if you're from the
From the
front,
inside.
they have a
Still
certain
get, at least two
reach.
courses in
So,
there,
I mean,
yes.
figure out the reach and then,
Agreed.
yeah. So,
Okay, point taken.
so let's put together a resolution for the board to vote on. My notes are approve the project, is that what I'm hearing? With support for seeing if, sorry, I don't think.
It's not, yeah, I can't turn it on either.
Okay, can you hear me?
we can hear you.
I'll just speak up. To approve the project with support to see about the viability of an exception for additional windows on the back elevations of the new construction. Does that accurately capture it? And that the finish be compatible, the finish on the back elevations be compatible?
I would say that the front elevation finish have a short return on the side to
Get it?
do a smoother transition to the block. Yeah.
Could you repeat that? Have a short, front elevation finish have a short?
The front elevation have a return some distance before the finish changes to block.
And did we need to include anything about the fence in front?
No, I think
I've already agreed that
yeah,
the
you-
fence will be switched to
an open
the one that
fence.
we're seeing on the inside.
Yeah.
Well, and to clarify, it sounded like that was not actually part of this
Okay.
permit
Yes,
request,
that
correct?
is correct.
I think that.
So should
Well, when it comes for this board, it's everything that's here.
No, but my understanding was that it was already,
Well,
already
then it wouldn't be in
approved.
front of this.
we can go to
We don't have to discuss it.
I take no exceptions to putting that into the modified drawings.
something with- okay, thank you.
Okay.
Sorry.
All right, am I on? So just to read, the motion would be to approve the project as presented with support to see about the viability for an exception for additional windows on the back elevation of the new construction. And a second measure then would be that the front elevation finish have a short return before the finish changes to block. Does that capture it?
Finish to materials. Material.
The front elevation material finish. Okay.
Material finish, correct.
So the second provision would read, the front elevation material finish
Yes.
has a short return before the finish changes to block.
Right.
Yes.
So if the board wants to, you can move and second and vote on it, or
I move
amend
to
it.
accept the motion. Accept the,
Color of the fence will be white.
Yes.
Is there a
second, anybody second on the minutes, or
the motion?
the motion?
Historic Tacoma would have two exceptions, so I guess we would enter those at the end of the voting for the record.
And you also can go straight to HPC with them.
Pardon?
Sorry. Historic Tacoma could also give those comments directly to HPC.
No, we'd like to put them on the record here.
Okay.
Okay. I'll give them to you now then. Our comments are twofold. One is we would encourage you to follow Mr. Kerwin's recommendations, which were to lower the building, which you've lowered it some, not quite enough. Should have been lowered 3 to 4 feet. It's currently lowered not quite that. The second would be to extend the finishes around the entire building. If you could do those things, we would be in total support of your project.
So I looked at how to reduce the height of the building. A livable space for a size of of what we have here, you would want at least a height of 9 feet in there. And by that math, we have already brought it down to 8'6" height, as I just mentioned, for the ceiling clear height in the space, which is important for the quality of space where the children will be residing for the best part of the day. I would not want to recommend a height any less than 8'6" for children to be living in that space. For lowering the building to the height, as you pointed out, from 3 to 4 feet, would want me to make the space to about 7 feet clear. And that is not a recommended height for a livable space.
Can you explain then why you would need 2 feet of structure between the first and second floor?
That is the truss height of the building.
That's what you're using, that's what you need to use?
Yes.
What's the span?
25 feet.
So you're doing clear span?
Yes.
Okay, understood.
Second to the motion, or do we want to amend it?
Second. I'll second the motion.
All in favor?
I'm sorry, so did we vote?
So all in favor?
Aye.
Are you voting?
No, I'm on.
Okay. And opposed?
Wait, so you're opposed
For those two contingencies?
for those two contingencies? So there's still,
And you're abstaining?
yeah, is that still gets us to yeah, great.
Although I did that, I appreciate what you've done, and I think you're
Thank you.
almost there.
Okay, so I think we're finished then. Thank you.
Thank you
We
very
still have a
much.
few matters to wrap up, but you guys are welcome to head out.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time. Okay, so this is the updated agenda. Next item is design consultations, of which we have none. So we'll move on. Under old business, we had listed retroactive reviews. This was in the context of having potentially having the electric charging station that already went in. That somewhat turned into its own discussion. I guess unless anyone feels strongly about discussing retroactive reviews, I think I'm inclined to wait and bring it back on the old business list when we have that come up so that we can discuss concretely. But I think there was some interest in thinking more generally about our role with that.
Is it going to come back? I'm a little confused on why the city attorney would weigh in on what this board reviews and what it doesn't review. It has no, he has no, talking about authority, he has no authority on this board.
Well,
Sorry. The review process is all set out in city code. And so he weighs in on city code. That is his authority.
No, the board, what's clear on what the board's function is, this is the reason why this was sent out, is that we weigh on anything that requires a historic area work permit, period. Okay. So if it's so my question is, does that charging station, does it require a permit and a historic area work permit?
It does.
It does. So then that means that to say that this board doesn't have the authority, but by the way, this board doesn't have any authority, period. The only authority that resides is with the county. This is an advisory board, but the board is done to maintain the historic character of this city.
So I think while the county is the enforcement entity,
No,
it's this.
it's the approval.
Well, can I finish my sentence? The county is the enforcer because it grants the permit. That's the trigger that allows someone to act or not, and they're the ones that have some kind of follow through. That being said, the city created our board So the city's code is what directs the role of our board in conjunction with the county. The county certainly has historic districts that do not have an equivalent board. So it's not up to the county to say what we're doing. It's the city that determines our role.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't.
You
no,
also,
what-
once again, you've interrupted me, which is not helpful. I was about to finish my sentence, and it does not make for a comfortable conversation when I can't
Finish.
complete the sentence.
Well, you need to read the language under which, so I don't think anybody's actually read this. When you get
I
forced to-
have read
when
it,
you're
and I
forced to read
still
it- when
think
you're
the
forced to read
city-
this because, quite frankly,
He's accusing
if-
us of having not
if-
done something.
Yeah, well, then the architects are placed on this board because we've gone into situations, like if I present a project, what we have, that requires historic approval, or any project in Georgetown, or any other historic district, what those boards do and what their responsibilities and how independent they are. And actually, quite frankly, those boards, when they do, nobody has the authority, especially the city, like Georgetown, to change or dictate what the board does or does not approve. So,
It's not a, I'm sorry, go ahead. I thought you were done.
So that's what I'm trying to understand. This language in here and how the county directs the applicants for doing work in a historic district, what the requirements are. They direct them to say, you have an historic board in Takoma Park that you need their approval first, or them not, you need them to weigh in on your project. And it is the scope of work as represented that requires a historic area work permit. Full stop. Okay, so it doesn't matter what it is or where it is, anything that requires a historic area work permit, whatever that scope is, and I don't care what it is, requires the approval of this board. So for the lawyer, the city lawyer, out of convenience, because they had placed the charging station on city property, or on, it's not city, I don't know whose property that is, and then construe the idea of what this board does or does not do, so that they can, usurp the responsibility of why that was put in there to begin with. I mean, I just have a real problem with how this whole didn't follow procedures, and when they didn't follow procedures, that they had the lawyer weigh in on where he has no jurisdiction on. So
I'm going
that's
to
what
turn it over to, I didn't see the order come in, but to Jim and then Ross.
Me? I would urge that you simply look at the required makeup of the board. You're bringing professionals to the table. You're bringing designers. You're bringing building owners. You're bringing residents. All people that are looking out for the best interests of the city. These people should not be restricted in any way in what their recommendations are. They've lived here, they work here, they know the city, they're highly recommended to be on the board, they're approved to be on the board. They have the best interests of the city in mind. So to restrict them in any way, at least for my reasons, maybe a little bit differently, I think is ludicrous.
Ross.
So I'm not quite sure where to start. This goes back to the code. The board exists because the city council passed a code that enacted it. That's the beginning, and the structure and the purpose and the functionality of the board is determined by the code. As you know, we've talked about the code a lot for the last few years. It has not changed. So I just handed out the existing code, and if you look at 8.40.070, it says very specifically, city standards for design set forth in section 8.40.080 and subsequent sections shall apply to the following areas upon adoption. Takoma Old Town, all commercial properties located on Laurel and Carroll. Takoma Junction, all commercial properties located on Carroll and Ethan Allen. All other commercial properties in the city on a voluntary basis only. This isn't an interpretation in response to the charging station. This is the code that guides what the board does, and we haven't always adhered to it. There have been many occasions when things that have happened on the public right-of-way have come before the board. That falls into the third category of voluntary basis. This board can review any project that comes before them if the board's willing to, whether or not it's in the historic district and whether or not it's a commercial property. And so that has happened on many occasions. The tree boxes were the most recent that come to mind. This is what sets out the work of the board. And it very clearly specifies commercial properties. That's why the city attorney weighed in, and this is what the city attorney does.
So I think to Jim's point about the value of this board, one sort of takeaway and perhaps request I'd like to put is that I think in some portion that you sent, and maybe it is this voluntary basis, there was mention of the city encouraged to bring issues in front of us. And I think I would like to reiterate that. You know, it does seem a little, aside from the regulatory requirements or the code requirements, a little out of scale to have like brought the tree boxes to us, but then not a discussion of the charging stations. You know, that being said, I think it seems appropriate for us to request that we would like to see those in terms of us then weighing in. Like if the city chooses not to, that seems unfortunate, but so it sounds like, I guess at this point, the city is choosing not to bring the existing charging station back to us, which brings us into that retroactive conversation, which is a separate ballgame, but also questions the value of this board. It's already built. What is our role? If there are future charging stations coming up, I think we could collectively ask to be consulted on those. It then, by code, is up to the city to do that or not. I do think we have some value add. I mean, you've already discussed in past meetings that there are options to clad, or to, you know, there are some things that could be done that can make those stations more appealing. And so if that's something that the city will make time for, I think it would improve both the end result of the constructed station and the relationship between this board and city staff and officials. Would anyone else like to add in? Jen?
Plain English, the regulations that you were citing, 8.40.070, only refers to the standards that are applicable. It doesn't refer to the scope of work that the board can undertake. Okay, so look at the language and understand language, how codes and regulations are written. This is just standards to apply, not the scope of work of what somebody does.
And I'll add on to that. So when it makes it very clear on the when it's first introduced, you know, what is historic, and they said it's Old Town and it's Takoma Junction. Because those are the two areas. So they needed a way to describe those two areas. They'd say the commercial districts. They're not the residential districts because they have their own historic properties that they go through their process. It's not part of this board, okay? So, so this language, as I interpret it, and the law has interpreted different, but completely how this board interprets it, I would like to think. It is the neighborhood complete that is represented by Old Town, and the neighborhood, which is represented by the commercial district, represented by Takoma Junction. The areas in between, which may also be commercial, are not part of that historic district, but they're commercial. What they're saying is that if those areas are wished to have some weighing in on, this board, we'll be more than happy to advise on those. Because if you,
I'm sorry, may
well,
I ask
well-
clarification?
The areas in between Old
Well-
Town and the junction? Is that what you're saying?
well, I don't look at a map and say what other commercial areas there are in Takoma Park outside of those two areas. Are there any other commercial districts in Takoma Park outside of those two areas?
Yes.
Well, then that's what I'm talking about.
Okay.
Okay? So, but if you go look to say, then what did that paragraph, what was the intent of that paragraph? How was that supposed to interpret? You go further into the very same codes, it says compliance procedures further on. And it says, first of all, that this, it goes on, it said that the city, which going down to it says 8.40160, and it's under 2, and there it lists, things not limited to the sustainability of the site plan, architectural treatment, plans, elevations, material, color, construction details, streets, sidewalks, and the harmony of the plans with the surrounding area. This is what we do. This is the area of enforcement, okay? So you can't, so anyways, the document works together.
What this paragraph is specifying is that that's what Montgomery County looks at. That they can look at things beyond the scope of this board.
No, that's not how I interpret this. That's the way you have this, that's the way the city has decided to interpret this, to be able to have the charging station not be presented in front of this board.
This isn't about the charging station.
Yeah, well, I think it is. I'm sorry.
Obviously you do,
I
but
do, because it only, yeah. So,
it's a very serious charge to make.
yeah, well, if this board, again, all the other historic boards, you ask what their jurisdiction is, okay? And whether it's the street, the lamp sign, the signage, the sidewalk, what the sidewalk material is, everybody weighs in on that. And that becomes part of that's what a historic board does, okay? Whether it's the local representation that has no authority but makes recommendations, or whether it goes to the HPC or the county where the authority does reside, okay? And the county had to ask, as like I say, all it says is completely historic area work plan. Whatever you're doing in that area, it should be in front of this board. If this board is reduced to just doing signage, how can we sit there and approve a sign on the Italian restaurant? We go through his laborious, and he was not all that happy what our recommendations were, right? But he abided by what we had asked him to do. Now there's this refrigerator right next to it, which is this charging station, and I can just think in his mind, he goes, what exactly happened? Why can I have a sign, and yet there's a big refrigerator sitting in front of my place of work right now? To say that this board can't put some perspective on the development, on keeping the character of this, then I have a problem with what is our purpose here then?
Okay, I'd like to turn it to Eric and then to Jim.
Yeah, do I remember correctly, when the charging station was already in existence, did we not get a letter, Susan Ludlow, I think? And she sheepishly, with her tail between her legs, was saying, we didn't do this correctly. We didn't do this, pro forma like we should have done, but it's there. And if you guys want to paint it or skin it, that's fine. Where, how come nobody said anything about that? Why was that, just railroaded in? I think we should have said something about that.
So I think we had at that point asked to be consulted going forward, and at that point, we're under the impression that we would hear from the charging station, hear from the city specifically on the existing charging station, but in this case on a retroactive permit. So just to be clear, the city is still, I assume, seeking a retroactive permit from the county because it is county required. At this point, when we were last discussing this, when it came to the existing station, that brought up the question of how useful or not our input was on a retroactive issue. That's not to say that we shouldn't discuss them, but that it brings up another question about our advisory role. Well, so the way I think it had wrapped up was one, the existing station, what is that going to look like in terms of a conversation? What is our role? Two, moving forward. And I think we could continue with the sentiment that if the city has other plans moving forward, we would request to be consulted. It's then up to the city to decide whether they want to do that. And I think it would, given the state we've reached, would hopefully bring us back to a more middle ground, trust-based relationship. Go ahead, Eric.
Isn't it very much like the fence that was put up, and then retroactively, the fence was taken down.
Right.
But
yes. So this was again where it put us in a tricky position, having weighed in officially retroactively. This then becomes it's at this point we're talking two issues. It's the retroactive and it's the relationship of city work to this board. But I don't think it changes the sentiment that we'd like to be consulted. It's a request, not a mandate. But and let's see. Now move on to Jim. Thank you, Eric.
Yeah, I would say there is a need to establish some kind of a working relationship between decisions that are anticipated to be made or want to be made by city staff relative to historic areas and things that affect historic areas. The charging station is not just one situation. There was a situation where the city also had an opportunity to acquire a bus stopping station, and they wanted to put it across from the library. You may or may not remember that. So here we've talked about not just one, but a number of situations occur, and it just requires a working relationship, things coming together, and making sense rather than somebody getting embarrassed because something has happened that others object to. We should all be on the same page when something like that happens.
So I would like to request that sentiment also be conveyed to us. I think it's important that if we want a open and respectful treatment from the city, we need to meet their actions with that same level of respect. We can certainly object. We can point out things we're concerned about, but I think that's an important consideration to be made on both sides. And I think this is kind of brought us to a place of conflict that feels unfortunate. Let's see, and Roz has, okay.
So I just wanted to say there obviously are many occasions when projects in the city right of way do come before the board and have in the past. So it didn't on the charging station. It did on the tree boxes. It did on the fence that went in on the junction parking lot. I had another one in mind. But so it's not as though city staff never brings them to the board when there's a project in the historic district. It didn't this time.
Well, but some of those situations in the past were forced to come before the board, if I understand it correctly. I mean, it's not just like, oh, let's just discuss this first. The process was already underway, and that's where the problems lie. That's,
Here, hold on, let's see. I know specifically with the tree boxes, which was, to be fair, not a facade, that was completely voluntary and was framed as such from the beginning. Let's see, rods all.
Yeah,
What's that?
so for both of those cases, they were not retroactive permits or reviews. They came early in the process. For the fence, HPC approved it anyway, so the city went ahead and put it in, even though FAB was not happy about it. For the tree boxes, it went through the normal process that we hope applications go through.
And Willie.
And maybe I'll just say a last word, but I would like to say, with the board's request, it seems like there's a little frustration on our side too. If it would include the entire commercial district, which includes all that is listed under what the board, what the county reviews under a historic area work permit. And that's what the board needs. Because
Are you asking for code change?
no, I'm saying that there's, in my mind, I read this and I don't read it the same as you, for whatever. So if the code has to change in your opinion, or the lawyer's opinion, then let's do that. But the review has to be complete, because I don't want to be in a board where I'm making, where I'm making decisions on signage. And, you know, and I have to look at the proprietor in the face. And he will look, he hands his hand, he goes, well, what about that? And I said, well, you don't have any jurisdiction. He goes, well, then what? Then why are we putting our other commercial people through what they have to do to get their projects approved? So anyways, I think this should be brought to the city's attention.
Roz.
I was just going to say, I think the short answer is it's to preserve historic assets, and the code defines that as the buildings, the historic properties.
Then the city has to change how they define historic, because the character of a historic district includes the sidewalks, the streets, the lampposts, the planter boxes, the benches. It includes all of that. So the city then, if that's the interpretation of the city, then from a historic perspective, they got it wrong. It's that simple, okay? So if you want to understand what a historic district entails and how approvals are done, the city can go up to the county and ask how it should be reviewed complete. It should be a complete review. You can't pick and choose what it is that will be reviewed by the board. If that's the case, then I'm really not interested in the board, quite frankly, honestly. If that's the case, my interest in maintaining what I feel is historic Takoma, why I live here, why people come here, why it's a place, you know. And then you can put a refrigerator in downtown Takoma Park and think that that's okay. You know, you need gatekeepers, and this is the gatekeepers. I'm sorry, this is the first line of defense on what is it that is my backyard.
All right, Eric, and then Roz. Eric, did you?
Yeah, I just want to break it for a minute, and we all need to inhale, exhale. The Montessori school are my neighbors. She and I had an altercation we had a confrontation the other day she berated one of my customers, not necessarily because it was my customers, but a woman came in furious because she had inadvertently thought that their driveway was the parking for the buildings next to the Montessori school. Realizing that it wasn't, she was making a U-turn to go out. The woman came out, and it's not important what was said, it was hot. When I went over, and we're all neighbors, we all have to be together, this has for 45 years, people have pulled in there thinking it's a parking lot. She discounted everything that I was told from my customers. It's not important who was right or who was wrong. Hence, I didn't feel comfortable being the negative vote to what they were doing. And I didn't have a problem with most of it, but I'm surprised that none of us was saying anything about a 5-foot tall white picket fence along the sidewalk. That to me is not historic. And hence, no, I didn't second that vote, and I barely raised my hand because what's the purpose of being the naysayer? Why didn't we do that? Why didn't what did we feel? To me, that's not historic. That's going to be an eyesore. So I quietly said, maybe the color will be different. Oh no, it's going to be white. Why?
So in terms of my understanding of the fence, maybe this goes to me trusting their statement that it was part of a prior permit, and in turn not.
Between you and me, I thought the prior permit was for the fence in the back of their property.
So, I don't know if anyone else has a specific on it.
There's only, he had a picture of a picket fence, but that fence in the back of the property is solid. It's a solid, and it's not wood fence, of course, it's plastic.
So, and I do think there was some discussion of its material, which got a bit at not having a solid full 5-foot fence. And I think Willie may have been the one who
they used the term translucent. Is that a correct architectural term for a fence? A picket fence is translucent?
That did confuse me a bit too. But Willie, I think you had specifically asked them about the fence. Do you want to refresh what it was that you?
If it was open, if it was a picket fence.
Okay.
So I wanted to look at what it was again. And
right.
Grade at maybe 5 feet. But actually, Eric, or anybody on this board, quite frankly, I'm protesting strenuously, and I'm the one who sends this stuff.
I got it.
Because I have an issue, and I'll throw it out there, and I don't mean to offend anybody. If I do it, I apologize.
Right.
But if the reason why the board is, and to your point exactly, or that it's made up of different people. If you have an opinion, you don't wait for somebody else to have the same opinion. If you are the only one who objects to it, then object. And strenuously object and say, I'm not going to vote with the board. And that's the reason why we vote. So I would encourage that some of us talk more than others, but more people talk, and then
architectural talk goes just so far. What is the block called?
The concrete block, the CMU is the term.
CMU. To me, you're going to build a cinder block building. That's what it really is, though, right? Like you see alongside the railroad tracks, those are cinder block buildings. Just what the heck does the matter what it looks like?
I think Willie makes a good point that unless you feel like you have a reason that you need to abstain from the discussion, which I understand, it sounds like you felt uncomfortable, but you either let that be known so that,
right.
I really do hope that you feel like you can.
Yeah, I should have said it.
Well, and I'm not trying to accuse you, but simply to say like your opinion is valuable. It doesn't have to be in the exact right architecture speak to matter. I think your reframing of that CMU question really articulates the issues that Windows and that conversation tried to address.
You guys
so I think it sounds like you were on the same page, and certainly hearing from you on that is valuable. And again, I'm sorry that the fence didn't get brought up as clearly, but certainly in the future, all issues that come to mind should, feel free to bring them up. All right. Any last thoughts? It sounds like we haven't really reached a resolution, but we don't necessarily need to. So I'm inclined to say if there are specific things that we'd like to discuss in our next meeting, we can ask that they be included in old business on the agenda. But is there anything else?
Yeah, I would like to see us pursue these concerns and not just let it drop. Not necessarily tonight, okay? But I think, I think it's a significant enough concern as to what the relationships, how they can be made better so that we don't have the kind of thing that happened recently. And I think it can be done. So I think everybody does things for the best of intentions, but everybody working together usually results in better solutions.
So let's see, it looks like Roz has there you go.
I just wanted to say it might be easy. I'd like to encourage the board to consider having the conversation about retroactive reviews in the absence of a pressing one. They have tended to be very messy, which makes it harder in that moment to decide, does the board want to consider a policy of weighing in or not weighing in? What's the role of advice if the project's already been built? Might be easier to do in the absence of a messy application in front of you. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's worth a try. I think I was a little, it helps to have something concrete, but I think you're right. The issues aren't necessarily case specific. They're to the retroactive nature and what it means for our role. Let's see, Willie.
Yeah. Retroactive, I agree, retroactive is not good, but like if you could get a permit on, the county could issue a permit and you say, great, I'm good to go, I'm going to build it. And they can come back and they said, well, you know, we misunderstood your drawings. It wasn't clear. This is in violation of code. Architects know you cannot say, yes, but you approved, you gave me a permit. That is not an excuse. So what they can do is they can do a stop work order, because the person that was supposed to have known that that did not comply with code, it's the professional. It's the architect or the engineer. Okay, it's not the responsibility of the AHJ. Okay, so when you talk about retroactive, it is within our business that happens all the time. So when we are presented with information and we render our opinion on it, okay, we provide our opinion at the information we had at the time. If it looks like it's in compliance or conformance with the entire code, or we approve it. When it comes to be that it's not the case, and it's not what we approved, then when it, for whatever reason, it came retroactive because they didn't have a permit or whatever it had to end up being, and it gave the board an opportunity to render its opinion again, then there's no problem at all to say what you built was not what we approved. Mm-hmm. That simple. Sure. Okay, so there's nothing about retroactive here. It is simply, so that's what I say.
But that's a different.
So yeah, that I think. Well, and I guess because it's 8 o'clock, I'd like to ask if the board would like to have the discussion now, or would like to put it first on the list for old business. Is that old business okay?
Yeah, old business.
I'm with you. Okay.
I would urge
Jim.
maybe setting 30 minutes aside the next meeting.
Specifically for retroactive permits. And to clarify, so we can think about it ahead of the next time, my understanding of our conversation about this in the past was that the retroactive issue was when individuals were coming before us after having built something without having been to us before. Coming to us with a built, and this has happened, this was the fence issue. Had the charging station been in our purview, it would be the charging station. And what is the potential for our role when something's already built? And do we want to set a norm for hearing the issue, but not approving? Is there a standard response we want to give the city? So those are the kinds of issues we had talked about before that I think would be helpful to flesh out in the future. So Anne and then Jim.
I guess,
Anne.
Sorry.
I was just going to say, I guess my question to that is, do they have to go for a retroactive historic area work permit? So then
That's when it comes
So then
up for
I
us.
would say then it comes to us. Like I don't.
Certainly, but I think we got ourselves into a position where we had approved retroactively a fence that was, I think some of us would argue, misrepresented to us, and it brought up questions of if we're advisory, what are we advising if it's already there? It's not. So I think we can certainly end by saying, conclude that it's not worth ruling out. But do we want to kind of have a norm set because it puts us in a funny position? So like, what are those norms? Okay. Let's see, and Jim, you wanted to add something.
Yes, I'd like to ask.
Oh, hold on, don't touch it. There. Oh, no, yeah, now you're good.
It's red. Is that okay?
Yes, you're all set.
Also like to pursue at the next meeting, coordination between city staff who are doing things on streets and areas like that, how can that better be coordinated with the facade board? And I think, Roz, if you'd be willing to talk to certain folks on that, and then maybe we can share ideas through you back and forth a couple times, and then maybe we could all get together and get it going.
I'll try and do that.
Thank you.
Okay, so that we'll have retroactive reviews and the relationship of the city to our board as old business next time. All right, well, I believe that is it, so we'll adjourn. Thank you all.
Thank you.